Welcome and thanks for joining us. This is the Disruptors Co New Ways series, and I'm really pleased to see so many of you here today, and we've got some great panelists for you. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm hosting and recording this meeting from the lands of the Darug and Gundungurra people. I also acknowledge that the traditional owners of the various lands on which you all work today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be participating in this event. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of New South Wales. In this session, we are discussing the challenges and opportunities that new ways of working present for building teams and collaborating. Joining me tonight are Murray Herbst, Director of Entrepreneurship at the University of Technology, Sydney, Jan Guvernek, CEO and founder of the European Visionary Marketing Digital Marketing Agency, and Julie Trell, Head of Miradi at Telstra. Welcome, everyone. Really pleased to see you, and I'm really excited about this conversation. We might start with you, Jan. So as our first international guest, and we're very pleased to have someone on a global platform from a global space in time, you've already built a range of teams in your work with a variety of organizations across international boundaries. What are some of those challenges that we see across the world that are really becoming really obvious to us right now?
Yeah, it's I wouldn't see them as challenges, actually. I would see them as more of a checklist. On top of my agenda, I would put respect. It's probably not limited to work, actually. It's probably something that you have to do in life. But okay, work is my department, so I will talk about this. First, I think you have to respect people for what they are, wherever they are, whatever they are, whoever they are, and stop thinking in lieu of them. So you have to listen to what they say and take what they say and look at things clinically. And rather than trying to imagine, this person is a German person, for instance, so therefore there's a number of prejudices linked to that, or he's an American, or he's an Australian, or a Celt like me from Brittany, etc. Second, I think, is linked to the first item. I would call it professionalism. So it's something that I've learned in my time in services companies. You focus on the delivery. So basically everything else doesn't matter. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you are, if you deliver, then you deliver. That's all. And you focus on just that. The third one I would say on my agenda is understanding cultural differences, but not exactly in the way that I've heard many people quote cultural differences. You have to understand them, you have to acknowledge them, but at the same time, what I'm going to say is a bit counterintuitive. You have to understand them and at the same time try and pretend that there are no cultural differences. And that goes back to the professionalism item. So basically you understand the cultural differences, but then you try and pretend that they're not here. I worked for a long time in Lebanon, and you probably know a bit about that country. It's a very complex country, and what you see in Lebanese society, you see in Lebanese businesses as well. So a number of jobs are related to certain religions or certain clans or certain groups, and this is all very complex, and this is all the result of history and the dismantling of the Ottoman Empire and all that sort of thing. So you have to understand this, but at the same time you have to ignore it, because if you don't ignore it, then you can't work with people, because you start looking at them as because they are Sunni or Shia or Christians, and then you start looking at the cultural differences and you're not looking at the business side of things. So you have to understand them, acknowledge them, maybe outside of work, talk about this with people to show that show your interest. But when you're in business, you have to remain clinical and factual. And my concluding words here would be to focus on the serenity prayer. You probably know about the serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to always tell the difference. So it's something that is very important. If you understand this, then you can work with different cultures, and different cultures start, very close sometimes. To you, I'm a Frenchman, but to me, I'm not. I'm a Celt. So you can always be someone different from wherever you are. If you go to Belgium, to you, it will all look like the same. It's such a tiny country. But if you're a Flemish and if you're a French-speaking Belgian, or a Bruxellaire, as they call them, for the people from Brussels, there are three different groups, and there's even the German-speaking ones. To them, it all matters. Cultural differences in a very, very tiny space like this. To you, it all seems the same. To them, it doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember working in China and meeting for dinner with some local Shanghaiese, and just fascinated by the way that that they would be treated at the dinner table, as opposed to someone, say, who was from Hong Kong or someone who was from Beijing, and just I was really lucky in that I had a coach who would step me through what was going on and the dynamics at dinner and who was eating first and who was eating second and who was sitting in the right spot and who wasn't, and all those sorts of things. And that was just dinner.
Interesting.
So Murray, sort of switching over to you, the work that you've been doing with UTS startups, not only sort of right now, but in the past, working with startups as well. You've had to inspire teams. So this is Jan was talking there about understanding the landscape of the teams and the way that teams fit together and how they work. But how do you activate those teams? How do you inspire them to want to work together?
Okay, fantastic question. And Jan, my wife is Lebanese. I've inherited a wonderful Lebanese family and increasing respect over the last 10 years for them as a people and as business people in particular. But back to the question, I think the problem we have today is the diversity of opportunities and things that people can be pursuing. And not so much a problem, but an opportunity that people need to be realizing and pursuing more. And I think that diversity creates its own problem, that when you talk about a kind of a perfect team and in forming the perfect team and inspiring that perfect team, if you're doing something that's in any way new, groundbreaking, your chance of being able to look at a template and say this is the right way to do that thing is pretty low. So I think there's a trap that people can fall into of being too formulaic in how they do things. I think the other kind of trap that humans are tempted to fall into is we think we're smart and we think we can understand what's going on in other humans, but I think we're actually quite limited in the breadth of things we can understand meaningfully. And so I think you have to divorce yourself a little bit from the thought that I can understand everything that will go into the team dynamics and the skills required and the evolution of that particular team. And instead just acknowledge and accept your own limitations and perhaps the idea that this is a new thing and requires a newly developed way of doing things. And instead then focus on, instead of how do we create the perfect team and how do we inspire that perfect team, think about how can we get people started and how can we help them receive the kind of affirmations they need to keep working on what they're doing, exposure to ways of thinking and tools and other people that might be helpful along the way, kind of recognition of what they're doing and what's going well, whether that's all from inside the team or outside the team. But I think it needs to be treated as something that evolves rather than something that is created.
That's brilliant. I was just wondering whether there was a sense of I don't necessarily call it agile, but being responsive to the changing conditions that are inside the team as well as that are outside the team.
Definitely, and it feels almost lazy to do that because it's really easy for me to sit here and say, "Oh, there's no right answer," so therefore I know the answer in saying there is no answer. But I just think increasingly Like at Fishburners, we had 500 companies start there while I was there. At UTS, we've got 370 something companies that we're supporting now. And my track record of saying that is a good company or that is a good team, it's terrible. And either I'm just completely incapable of doing it, or the chances of describing the perfect team or company on day one are just too low. I think there's too many things that change over time and too many things that aren't predictable.
Perfect segue, because now we want to talk about success. So, Julie, you've managed teams at Telstra and at Salesforce, and you've seen what makes a successful team.
Yeah.
One of those things that you're passionate about is diversity in teams. And from everything I've read and things that I've experienced myself, I can see that diversity is really super important. But tell us why. Why is diversity important to building a team and managing a team?
Sure. So if we hire all the people that look like us, that sound like us, that talk like us, that think like us, we are going to enter a dangerous echo chamber of groupthink. And when everyone's thinking the same thing, you're not able to design the products, the services that will reach everyone, the fringes or on the edges or people thinking differently. So Jan had mentioned this about listening, learning how to listen from different people. And that's a really powerful skill as a product designer, as a developer, as a team member, to understand where other people are coming from. And I think both of you touched on the concept of empathy and understanding where people are coming from. So you're stepping in their shoes and taking a step back to hear how they think. And I part of this listening and diversity comes from the storytellers that are out there, that are in the group, that are telling the stories, whether you're a founder pitching your idea, whether you're a team member pitching a new brainstorm or a concept. But we also need story listeners. And people might hear things very differently and come up with different ideas. So this opportunity, the sense of diversity, helps create and inspire and spark innovation. I also, like Murray, running accelerators and found a remarkable culture and a team family when we had diversity of gender at the very least, where people showed up differently. They took up different responsibilities. There was a lot of great camaraderie. It wasn't just I'm in it for here and in my own space, where a lot of the women founders would ask for help from one another. And then that became a characteristic and a trait throughout the cohort, that really everyone was able to gel. Also, one of my team members at Salesforce, he was in the Army. And so he operated and worked at a very different style than I did. I mean, he used to call me boss, and that was really weird for me, but that's how he operated. And he shared a lot of stories on how that hierarchy and his experiences, so there's diversity of experiences also that everyone can bring to the table, again, to design products, to create solutions that are not just for the masses, but we're also designing on the fringes as well. So I find that all really, really important. And I think also Jan mentioned this about cultural. So think about call centers where you have masculine and feminine, or diversity of cultures and languages and protocols. And, what you mentioned, Gavin, about cultures at dinner, how to show up, knowing if you're dealing with different customers and users, you need to have that diversity on the other side to be able to answer appropriately, be empathetic, and know how to answer in the right, if you will, language.
So you mentioned there a couple of times the concept of showing up. So can you just sort of dive into that a little bit? Because I think it's an absolutely imperative, important part, but a lot of people don't know what that means or how to go about enacting showing up. So
showing up as yourself is really important, and not trying to conform to what you think might need to be there. It's scary. It's very scary to do this, but once you show up as authentic, because people are going to have the same fears, the same concerns, but once you show up and you own your personality, your beliefs, it will spark conversations. Some might be uncomfortable, but with uncomfortableness is growth and opportunity. So just being able to be in that room and not just be that listener, the story listener, which is important, but to present what you believe in and showing up in that respect.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. That's a great explanation. So Murray, Over in the work that you do, you're also seeking out diversity, obviously in terms of startups and teams and so on, but also individuals. And you mentioned growth, and Julie just mentioned growth there as well. How do we bring growth? How do we bring skill diversity? How do we bring all those things into effective collaboration?
That's
That's an easy question, right?
That's an easy, yeah. I think the idea of bringing growth into it, I think, is about relying less on the team itself. So I'd take yourself as a wonderful example, Gavin, that the skills you have are incredible, but also what is incredible is your network and the things that you're able to do and control that are outside your kind of locus of control in what you can do yourself. And I think in developing that in a team, taking the focus outside of what that team itself can do and thinking about what that team can access and bring in, and thinking of teams as a part of a surrounding kind of ecosystem rather than an ecosystem in themselves, is, I think, a nice way of looking at things. And obviously I would say that because we're working with a lot of startups in a community environment, and in previous roles I've done the same thing. But this happens again and again, that a couple of people working on a problem is good. A couple of people that have access to hundreds of other people that are humans and that have reciprocity as a native kind of habit and who care about each other and can share their skills and networks and motivation and everything else that they do. I think that kind of a team concept that is part of a community or a society rather than just a team concept is a valuable way of looking at it. And I'd say that's where the growth really can come from as well. That if you just think about how can people on that team grow, you're going to get a fairly linear kind of growth. But if you think of how can that team be empowered by things outside what that team itself can do, I think that's where you get the unusual growth.
That's a great answer to a difficult question.
Thanks.
And actually what it brings up, and I think this is a really, again, another great segue, is over into culture and values, right? So when we think about what does it mean to be part of a community, does our own individual, our group, our team, but also our community values, how do they all align? But how do they remain tolerant of that diversity as well? And so maybe, Jan, you could talk a little bit about how you ensure that those voices are equally heard and given airplay and space in these ecosystems.
Yeah. I really like what Murray said about networks. I think it's very important, and I mean, probably all of us around this call are familiar for social media work, and social media is about networks, and it's about sharing, and it's about networking with different people. And I think it's very, very important to network with other people to break out from these echo chambers that Julie's mentioned. This is very interesting what you're asking about cultural values, Gavin. The first thing that I would say, if you want to, we all belong to places and we all belong to cultures that have sort of made us without really understanding why, actually, but they have made us. You can't beat that. But at the same time, we do not choose where we are born. It's something that is very important to understand. And very often I see in negotiations, people from one side compared to another side, comparing themselves with others based on this understanding that they belong to some place, as if they had chosen, they were born there. But in fact, we didn't choose. We didn't choose where we were born. We may be lucky to have been born someplace nice rather than someplace not so nice, but really we don't choose. So there's the first thing that I would say, if you want to be working in multicultural teams, you have to do away with this idea that you chose or you're proud to be from somewhere, because actually you didn't choose to be born there. And another thing that I would say is go back to what I said earlier on about pretending that there are no differences, because there are lessons that I learned in the field. So we're talking about China a few moments ago. And I worked in China some time ago on the implementation of an information system. And and I was relatively young at that age, and I was thinking that because you'd be traveling across the world, and at that time China was really, really different from Europe. There was a huge gap, a much bigger gap than there is now. You would think that their cultural values would be, in business, I mean, again, would be radically different from the ones you would find, say, or come across in England or France or Germany or anywhere like this. And one thing that I've noticed is that in businesses, when you're trying to implement something, resistance to change, despite the cultural difference, it is always the same. Always the same arguments coming in and about the systems. And what I found was working pretty well in this implementation across the world was actually to try once again to ignore these cultural differences, even though you try to understand them, because and focus on the clinical professional side of things. Now, there's another anecdote I'd like to tell you about, which is very different, which I came across in Lebanon. We were working there in multicultural teams, both French and German, and you can imagine what French and German can do together. It's pretty hard. And I remember at one point in time that there was a total incommunicator between the teams. Once again, on this premise that, you were born here and I was born there, and therefore we are different. And the fact of the matter is I speak German, but they didn't know it. and at a point in time, I broke into that discussion, and I took one of the guys in a breakout room, and so we had this honest to God discussion in German, and then the scene changed completely. So going back to what Julie said about stepping in the shoes of others, can be very, very helpful, understanding the language and speaking the language of others as well. Sometimes it's good to ignore these cultural differences, as in the Chinese example I've given you before. And sometimes you have to use these cultural differences and show that you understand people, and probably try and show empathy and try and speak the language if you can, to level out the differences and forget about this thing about us and them and being born here and being born there. Really, to me, it's really important. You didn't choose to be born in Germany, or you didn't choose to be born in France, and you have to forget about that, because that's how you work well in multicultural teams.
Very cool. I love a bit of tough love in in team building. It's always an interesting one. But I guess tough love is great because it brings that human dimension. But there's also increasingly a technology dimension to building teams. And Julie, COVID-19 has certainly brought technology into the spotlight here. Some of the tech is great, some of the things are not great. But from your experience and what you've seen and the way that you worked, what have you seen that does really bring out collaboration in teams?
Well, I love this question. I'm really excited about it. And this, I'm going to start with the tech side of things, how COVID and tech have amplified some of the work that I've been involved with, which is the CEO Fund for female entrepreneurs, for women entrepreneurs. And we have launched in 5 countries. And because of when COVID hit, unfortunately, some companies shut down. We were struggling. How do we meet with one another? Through the use of Zoom and connecting weekly, it's basically my Wednesday morning coffee. I actually called it tequila for my soul, of meeting with these women across the globe and setting up a safe space. So we also set up the space that it's safe to ask, it's safe to be, it's safe to show up. So this has been an incredible network of women showing up. And on top of that, we have created this very simple app. So talk about tech, we're learning how to ask and give, a very simple learning how to, I need help with business planning. Can you connect me with customers? And so this very simple app, we share with all of the activators, the women who have contributed into the CEO fund. So this has been really exciting, regardless of the technology that we use, whether it's Zoom or Hangouts or Teams. There's a sense that we have set up this space where everybody meets in a hole. We get a what's going on, and then we break up into small groups. So we make it interactive. It's not just the sage on the stage. We get to play and talk. And then the other thing that I'm very passionate about, which I actually have done on tech, and it's a scary word for some, but improv and applying the principles. Oh, somebody got really excited. Applying the principles of improv makes for such collaborative teams. It helps with growth. It's connecting, and it teaches each other how to show up in a safe space. So for instance, one of the principles is saying yes and. So building on each other's topics or ideas without shutting them down. One of my favorites ones, which falls into this collaboration side, is making your partner look good. So if you ever watch like Whose Line Is It Anyway, and you watch the actors play with one another, they give each other what are gifts, like lines that they can play off of. So if you show up with a mindset of making your partner look good or making your teammate look good, your teammate is going to make you look good. And in the end, everyone will, all good-looking teammates rises all boats, if I can mix a lot of metaphors. But with that, it's creating that safe space, and it's learning how to show up authentically. One final thing that I do with my teams to be authentic is we do these one-word check-ins. So similar to what Jan was talking about, in Germany having the conversations, but when you're in meetings, we do a one-word check-in rather than going around the table and everyone telling how their weekend was. How are you feeling right in that moment? So people might say, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I'm stressed, I'm elated. You know how to disarm or add to how that person is showing up in the room. So these are the kind of tools. You can do this on tech if they're meetings, but they have just created safe spaces for people to show up and share what they're thinking and connect. So it connects and strengthens those networks that Jan mentioned earlier as well.
So again, we're kind of back in that space of values and rituals and how we bring that human dimension to the technology we're using, which is super cool. Murray, in terms of things that don't work, have you seen things that, are there barriers to collaboration that we're being presented with? I mean, COVID-19 is a big one, right? But what else have you seen?
Yes. So I'm kind of weird. I'm like one of those kids that was raised by wolves and should be studied by some psychologist, because I dropped out of high school, started a company. That company was developing software, and everyone that I worked with was overseas. And for 14 years, that collaboration was all emails, IRC chat, other kind of team collaboration tools. And I would either be the only person working in Australia, or I would travel around the world and keep working. And that made me weird. People don't have that experience. And when you throw a whole bunch of people into their bedrooms and say, stop being the human that you are, stop having that kind of interaction that you're used to, and keep doing the work that you have to do, people struggle. And so I think the thing that we're seeing and that you can expect to see is a lot of people struggling with this new way of engaging. I think the important thing from it, though, is for everyone watching this, you are one of the people that will do well, because you are taking the initiative to view this, attend this, because you want the content, not because you want the networking, not because you want the free food and drinks, not because it's conveniently located and you can't walk past it without being rude. All the normal things that get people engaged in events and group activity have disappeared. And now there's so much burden on people creating interesting stuff to be even more interesting than they were before, and B, opportunity for people that have initiative, that put in a little bit more work, to massively stand out from the crowd. And this applies to students in high schools, to students at university, to people in professional lives, to people in teams. I think people will start to see that, I think. And I think that'll change how people engage. But for the moment, I think engagement is really, really hard across the board from everything I'm seeing. And I just think there's a massive opportunity for everyone watching this stream.
Absolutely. I totally agree. You guys are just ticking all my boxes. It's fantastic. So in a few minutes, we're going to be opening up to questions from the floor or from the YouTube channel. If you have questions, please enter it in the chat window and it will come through to us and we'll be able to ask our panel. So come up with some great questions because you've got a great panel here that you can plumb their brains while they're available. So Julie, given the impact of COVID on our economies and our jobs, effective team building is going to become more important, less important. What about revenue? What about productivity? You know, the hard parts of business. Where do they
lead? So I'm going to pull a quote from an American movie from the 1970s, Bad News Bears. I don't know how popular it was here. We got someone who likes it. It was basically a group of ragtag teens and misfits who get together and have a baseball team. They're all miserable. They didn't know how to show up in life well, and they got brought together as a team. And I'm going to ruin the plot, but in the end, they win. So the quote from there is, all I know is when we win a game, we win as a team. When we lose a game, it's a team loss. So for me, someone who thrives when the whole machine works and people are together and it's a connected system, I think that is a little bit more important, and that will help increase rebuilding revenue and productivity. People will be able to rely on one another. They will be able to step in for one another and fill those gaps of revenue loss or productivity challenges. So it also creates a sense of belonging, and you want to belong in a team. You want to belong in the company. And when you have a happier, healthier team, you will be more productive, and the revenue and the customers will show up.
It's so fascinating to hear you talking about the way that that sort of combined ownership really kicks in difficult times. And it's almost like, you know, sometimes in the past we've had to manufacture a little bit of crisis to make teams come together. We put them into escape rooms and into unusual circumstances. And yet every day now is an escape room. Every day is an unusual circumstance. So we're having to deal with that on a whole new level. And I do love the Bad News Bears. That was me gasping.
Thank you.
So Jan, technology facilitated collaboration across international boundaries, like we're doing right now, has been said it's a great equalizer for business. Sometimes this has come to pass, sometimes it hasn't. Has it been true for you? Have you seen things that really worked across international boundaries?
Yeah, technology is obviously, as Mary and Julie have said, it's not really a choice now. We have nothing else. So if we want to work with one another, we have to use web conferencing and stuff like that. I've been using web conferencing for a long time. I was the guy actually who introduced WebEx at Orange 20 years ago. So it seems like I've been working with these tools forever. And like Mary, I've worked with a lot of remote teams for a long time. And since I created my business in 2014, that's almost 8 years ago, it seems like we're doing nothing else. So to us, it's almost natural that we're working remotely, and at the same time, these tools are actually helping us maintaining a link with other people, with teams, with remote teams, and also in other countries. And we're working with people throughout the world, and it's really great. Now the only difference since March 2020, well, that's when the lockdown was put in place in Europe, is that we have no choice. So what was once a choice for us to work remotely and build virtual teams throughout the world has now become a must-have for everyone. Even my wife was working in the research sector in the civil service, Now she has to work remotely the way we used to do when she wasn't used to that. Now they all work like this. So technology is almost receding in the background. It's something that we use every day, and I mean, very soon I think people will not think about firing up Zoom or WebEx or whatever, because it would be their normal way of working. And already we see a lot of people actually leaving big cities to settle down in the either remoter suburbs or even out there in the country. And we'll see more of that. I mean, mostly if COVID-19 is set to go on for another year, as is probably the case. We're going to have announcements here today in Paris. We're going to have curfews and whatnots, and that's probably telling signs of another lockdown, which will probably take place in October and November as we're entering winter here. So I think technology is going to play a huge role, and the more it plays that role, the more we'll tend to forget about it. It'll become natural for more and more people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Julie, you're going to say something?
Yeah, if I can just add, as being a former classroom teacher and technology specialist in inner city Atlanta, this pandemic unfortunately has recreated or made the digital divide even greater for some. And I feel it a tiny bit. So my company has blocked Zoom. I am on literally a 9-year-old laptop that I brought back to life. So the speed, the frustration, and it's only, I'm still privileged that I have this access, but there's that concern. And how are we going to fix that of the people, the adults that are missing and lacking of this technology, and how do we make that inclusive, and how are we going to make them more inclusive and catch them up, because we are still moving forward with these kind of technology platforms.
Absolutely. I feel like we take a lot of this for granted, right? Because we have access to it, and this is the way that we normally work. But I was over the recent holidays, I did revamp an old laptop that I had just sitting in a cupboard for a young kid that didn't have a laptop and couldn't do remote learning. And I just thought, this is crazy. We probably all have computers lying around somewhere that could be repurposed. So finding ways to do those sorts of things is a great thing to do, I think. We do have a really interesting question come through from Gil Carter, who says that with all of your collective experience in distributed teams, what should newly remote COVID teams, so newly remote, never done this before, what should they aim to make work well? What are the top 3 things? Maybe if we could just go around and start with Murray.
Okay, fantastic question. I think the thing that really makes me think is, imagine yourself in 5 years' time, post-pandemic, and how you're going to feel. Because everyone is taking into account the digital divide and accessibility and the other problems which need to be fixed. All the people that are sitting on Zoom now had access to Zoom before but chose not to use it. So I think there's a human element that I think we won't be able to escape. I think as soon as we're allowed to return, a lot of people will want to return. So I think treating it as a temporary thing is something I'm personally hanging on to, and I think gives people a lot of hope when they're struggling with their things as well. I think avoiding replication of the workplace online, so don't just have a stream going or other things so that you pretend that you're still in the same place. I don't think humans are made to communicate that way. I think the last thing I'd say is, I think being super clear on what it is you need to do and when you are done doing it, so that because you don't have that kind of switch on, switch off state of mind that you have in a workplace. So that remote working and being more strict about what your work actually is and when you're done doing it, I think is an important thing as well.
Disciplines. Julie.
I got it. All right. So 3 things. Be human. Be human. Reach out. Ask how team members are doing. This is not technology. Just pick up the phone, the text, or what have you, and truly check in. 1. Second one is play, have fun, games, again, with my improv hat on, and games and opportunities to get to know one another, make it a fun and safe place, and listen. Not just listen to the words that they're saying, but attitudes and emotions. There is some technology that can read those kind of emotions, that AI, but really truly listen to your team and what they're saying and how they're saying it in order to keep that collaboration and a healthy team.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Jan, what do you think?
There's things that I've learned throughout the years with all this work that we've done remotely and working with collaboration with teams remotely, is that you have to beware of email. It's something that I've learned throughout the years. There's a lot of misunderstandings going on with email, where people actually write long messages, and they're being responded asynchronously, and then there's a lot of misunderstanding, and then it ends up in pretty awry, and you waste a lot of time as well. So most of the time, if you want to work well remotely and collectively, you have to use real-time sharing and work together on work like documents and others. So that's what I would say is the most important item regarding collective work remotely.
One more thing I just want to, and also set up expectations. And I think it just adds, it's a yes and to what Jan was saying, is the expectations.
Yeah, interestingly, I was chatting with a client this afternoon, and she was saying at 5 o'clock, she turns everything off, she closes the door and she walks downstairs, and that's the end of the day. But it was a new discipline for her. So she used to come home from work and continue to work. And so it seems like COVID is creating new disciplines in work-life balance that some people didn't have before.
Sure.
So another question. So what about dealing with teams that aren't working? Interesting question. How do we break up dysfunctional teams, and should we? Who wants to have a go at that? Murray.
Sorry. I think so everyone starts a company, and I'm talking from a kind of entrepreneurial perspective, everyone starts a company being best friends and assuming they'll always be best friends. And the chance of that continuing through all the hard work and stress and other things that go on inside a company is pretty low. If you look at the kind of end result of a lot of co-founder relationships. I think in that environment, the idea that you would not try to intervene or to dislocate or even be prepared for that situation at the very least is, I think, naive. So I'd say yes, 100% intervene quickly and in a way that ideally from the start is assuming the team on day one won't always be the team that makes sense.
Julie, maybe from your perspective, you fly above the over the top of a lot of organizations, a lot of teams that you see come that have been formed, and so you often have insights into the way that they work in ways that maybe the founders or the managers don't see.
Yeah.
How do you dip in there? How do you manage that?
Well, oftentimes it's more listening and watching. Oftentimes it can be one or two people that ruin it for everyone. And the high performing, I'm going to use a bad word, the high performing asshole that can really make things toxic. There could be one person that is toxic, and understanding how to disarm that, definitely get rid of them, in such a way so they're not harming everyone else's productivity. Some of the stuff that I have done, Murray brought up the concept of founder breakup or founder challenges. I've done role playing. So practicing, we had some really young founders that wanted a third founder to exit, and he wasn't pulling his weight. So we did role playing, and we practiced how to have those hard conversations. Literally standing in, playing the role of the person you wanted to have exit. What would that person say? So you could just practice and be comfortable having those hard conversations. But it's very important to, again, listen and see if there is one toxic person, that is affecting things. And also, if the expectations and the framework and the groundwork aren't set up from the get-go, that will also cause the dysfunctional teams.
Excellent. Jan, what do you think about this? You already mentioned one of the hard conversations you've had and facilitated during some of your projects. Is there an art to those hard conversations?
It's going back to that question about the people who are breaking up dysfunctional teams. That's a very, very hard one. I'm not very good at that, actually. I'm a person who actually doesn't like conflict. So what you were referring to was sort of a last resort, and it wasn't really about conflict. We weren't really playing hardball. We were trying to discuss issues honestly and properly. And nicely as well, as nicely as possible. I believe I'm a believer in negotiation. Always negotiate. So I'm really not good at chucking out people because they're not pulling their weight, and it's probably bad, but it's something I can't do. It's not part of my DNA. So most of the time we try and negotiate with people and discuss things honestly. Okay, we take a seat or have a cup of coffee somewhere and then let's discuss this issue together and try and work it out together. And I must admit, I haven't had too many of these issues in my teams. Sometimes we had people losing motivation or something like that, but we've managed to solve the issue. I'm trying not to play hardball with people. So to get back to your point, it may be as I say, an honest to God discussion, but I don't believe in conflict. I don't think that conflict solves anything. There's a great book which I recommend to everyone. It's you probably know about it. It's Uri and Fisher's Getting to Yes. It's not a business book. It's a book about negotiation. But I think every business person should actually read this. Getting to yes. It's not getting to know, actually.
No, exactly. Many years ago, I remember working at a university, and we were talking about conflict resolution, and we're trying to explain to students how that worked. And so the lecturers had this plan to actually create a friction-full environment, and then show students how that worked. But what they didn't count on was the fact that it could be explosive. And so they instigated this space of conflict between 4 different groups, and it just exploded, and all these meetings just erupted all at the same time, and no one was really prepared for any of it. And so I ended up having to run around and just settle all these different groups down because it just went out of control really fast. So the whole idea of understanding conflict, understanding the way that teams come together and how they can collaborate or don't collaborate, and how that can become meaningful and how it can become explosive and escalate really quickly, is actually a really fascinating part of the human dimension of teams, I think, which is one of the challenges, but also one of the opportunities for working in sort of distance or remote sort of spaces that we're sort of seeing here. So if we think about all of this as we've sort of been going through here, do you think we're getting better at collaborating? Do you think we're, or as Gil was saying in the comments, sometimes a Zoom meeting could have been a better email. Are we over collaborating? Are we finding better ways of collaborating? Murray, you seem to be nodding.
Yes, Julie, did you unmute? Okay, I just didn't want to jump in. Yes, I think there's a thing happening now where individuals are able to do things that individuals couldn't do before. And small teams are able to do things that small teams couldn't do before. And so whether it's developing a solution or distributing that solution to the world, or all the things that enables, again, with my entrepreneurial hat on. And I think the future we're looking at is one where there's a much, much larger number of smaller companies doing amazing things, enabled by platforms, technologies, etc. And I think in that world, the collaboration becomes different. The idea of working within a large company and figuring out how to get things done within that large company, and the culture of that company, and the kind of the entrepreneurial hustling that people do to stand out in that environment, that is going to go away. And I think the collaboration we're going to find instead is where people have to work with people they don't know, and kind of corral resources from things that are outside their control, and to have initiative and follow this kind of myriad of opportunities and find one that makes sense for them. I think that is a different world of collaboration outside of what people might have thought it used to be.
Julie?
So one thing I was thinking of, that this new working from home, working remotely, might be the superpower for introverts, where introverts could thrive in this space and contribute equally, and not have to fight for what they need to be heard, whether it's just doing the work and submitting it. But I think, I know I actually feel like I've become a closet introvert, and I think that this might be able to give a different voice, if you will, in a way introverts work.
Interesting. Jan, what do you think?
That's a very interesting question. As I've seen, I've looked at people around me and how they implemented remote work and web conferencing and all that kind of things, and I've seen several ways of implementing it, and it pretty much depends on the structure and the size of the structure. For independent workers and small entrepreneurs like us, there's no such thing as a better email over a Zoom meeting, because we only spend that much time on Zoom, which is necessary. So we're never going to spend an hour's worth of a meeting if only half an hour is necessary, because I don't know, sometimes over the course of a day, I can switch up to 15 times tasks during the day, because we have, say, 9 to 10 different customers, and we have juggle many balls, and we don't have time to spend on useless things, either emails or useless web conferencing. So a lot of the remote work that we carry out on Zoom and other web conferencing tools is actually timed. So there's no waste of time. But what I've seen in larger businesses is teams trying to fill in the gap. Because they are in this unnatural situation for them, that they have to work from home, and they lack a lot of rubbing shoulders with other people and talking with other people and discussing over a cup of coffee and others. Then they tend to go into these endless Zoom meetings, which are in a way not very different from these never-ending meetings that you have in businesses, as I sometimes witnessed at Orange or Unisys or Capgemini, where you had people getting into meetings for days on end, and it would never finish. So they're trying to reproduce this online, and obviously it's a disaster. It doesn't work at all. It's terrible. It frustrates everyone. It's even worse, actually, that these lengthy meetings, these lengthy face-to-face meetings, which are already very frustrating. But if you put this online, it's 10 times more frustrating, because you go, well, actually, that's debatable. But anyway, we as entrepreneurs cannot afford to do that, because if we do that, then obviously we lose business. And I can't spend a week, working with a customer in meetings, unless obviously I invoice them for that, and then it's a different kettle of fish. Then it's no longer a meeting; it's actually an engagement.
I love that. Sometimes those engagements are actually just meetings.
Exactly.
I think I've had some of those clients as well.
As long as you collect money from that, it's fine.
So we've got another question, which is around high performance teams or hyper effective teams. So how do you? And I've worked in some, and I've created some, and they do seem magical at the time. And I remember thinking, this may never happen again. Is there something? Is there something to these unicorn teams? How do we know when we're in one, and how do we make more of them? Do you think, Murray?
I think every time I've had that feeling, and I know the feeling, I've got the feeling right now with the team that I work with. You sit there looking at it, going, "Oh, that's pretty lucky." I walked into that room and met that person, or whatever circumstance led you to be able to work with these people. So I think being lucky is a requisite for forming those teams, but you can make yourself more lucky, your kind of surface area for luck in who you engage with and how you build out those teams. I think the thing that you notice once you're inside the team is that everyone is rowing that little canoe as hard as they can. And I think teams fall apart a little bit when someone stops rowing and everyone else kind of looks at that person and gets a little bit demotivated by that. There's a wonderful feeling from being in a team where everyone's rowing really hard because they care about what they're doing and they're very good at what they're doing and they're being trusted with what they're doing. I think that kind of metaphor of everyone rowing really hard together is that super high performing team. And ideally with actually the skills to do what they need to do. But that's, I think, a bonus along with the hard part of actually getting everyone aligned and working hard.
So true. Julie?
Yeah, so real quick, I think focus. You find founders that are focused, that are going for the same goal, and they're bringing their team along with them, that are listening to their mentors. And if the mentors, investors, and creating boundaries, if it's not right, saying, thank you very much, but I'm going to move on. So just hyper focused on the goal that they want to make in creating those boundaries. And, just having a belief in what they're doing and being willing to take the risk. And if it fails, learning from the failure.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
Totally agree with Julie. That's what our Nelson used to call the common understanding. He beat the crap out of the French without even being alive, so you must know what he meant. His goal was so clear that all other admirals and generals actually knew what to do and did it. Is a very powerful example.
Brilliant. Fantastic. That's been a really, really interesting panel discussion. I'd like to give you all 30 seconds to provide one final thought. So we'll start with Julie and then move to Jan and then over to Murray.
Mine
will be starts quick. Now.
All right, great. So I'm a people person and a collaboration and working with humans. So I'm going to end with an African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Okay, my last thought will be for those who actually can't work remotely. There are all the blue collars of this world, all these people that actually can't hook up onto Zoom and do their work. They have to be there, and actually they make up 85% of the workforce throughout the world. I mean, wherever you go in the world, you will never find more than 25% of people who can actually work remotely. And I think we'd have to pretty much think about these people if we don't want to run into social problems in various countries. So I think it's a serious issue.
100%. Murray?
And quickly, I'll say two things. Firstly, I spend my life doing this, but I'll do it here as well, that everyone should be thinking about being an entrepreneur. We're all going to die. Entrepreneurship is great, but also it is especially great at the moment. It's always been wonderful because you get to be your own boss, work on things that matter, work on technology that excites you, blah, blah, blah. But now you have tools to create solutions, tools to distribute those solutions, and more problems to solve than there ever were before, and a need to create your own job and jobs for other people and prosperity for Australia in particular. So think about doing that if you're not already. And the second thing I'll say is, Gavin, you're amazing. I love your work, and I'm honoured to be with you tonight, and so thankful for the work that you're doing.
Thanks, Murray. I mean, thank you all, actually. So it's been a fantastic panel, and I do love doing these panel discussions. We're always amazed by fantastic insights that come out of them. We've been recording this session, and we're really thankful for everyone who's attended live, but you can also watch this one delayed as well. So you can do that at theair.works/newways. In the meantime, we'll be running another one of these in about a month's time. Stay safe, stay well, and let us know how we can help you in any way to convene audiences, create and collaborate on our platform, theair.works. Thank you and good night. And have a great evening.